It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm Elise Westhoff, the President and CEO of the Philanthropy Roundtable. For those of you who don't know, Philanthropy Roundtable is a network of donors who are trying to build a movement, a philanthropic movement, to strengthen our free society. And we achieve that by advancing our core values of liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility through effective and strategic philanthropy. I'm honored to be in conversation today with a man who needs no introduction in this room, I know. Peter Travers is chairman of NRI's board, and he's also a successful businessman. He serves as managing member of Chasefield LLC, a diversified investment firm that he founded in 1992. Before that, Peter worked as an investment banker and practiced securities law. In addition to that, he is a committed philanthropist, and that's what we'll be discussing today in greater detail. As you know, the theme of NRI Ideas Summit is Sources of American Strength. And we'd love to talk to you about one of the greatest sources of that strength, philanthropy. It's uniquely American. In fact, Americans gave $500 billion to charitable causes last year. It offers the potential to solve some of our nation's most pressing problems, and it improves the lives of the most vulnerable in our society. From combating poverty, to eradicating disease, to ensuring that every child has access to a quality education. Philanthropy shapes the trajectory of our nation, the lives of millions, in countless ways. And it's made possible by our free market system, the innovation it sparks, and the wealth it creates. Rather than looking to government to solve all of our problems, Americans often look to themselves and their communities and ask, what can we do? As a result, the solutions, those local solutions that come from charitable giving are often far more durable and effective. And our rights to free speech and association allow us to serve as active citizens and support the causes and communities that we all care about. Unfortunately, in this time, all of this is now under attack. Not just philanthropy itself, but the broader free market system and our constitutional rights and freedoms. There are now efforts to restrict, coerce, shame philanthropists for not giving to certain chosen causes. For instance, these calls for greater transparency are really often efforts to undermine donor privacy. And attempts to force donors to give in certain ways are actually designed to control where people's dollars go. So it's never been more important to approach philanthropy strategically and thoughtfully, and that's what we want to talk with you about today. I know Peter cares deeply about philanthropy and its role in society, so I am going to turn to him and ask him to tell us a little about what your view is on American philanthropy and its role and importance in our society.
Thank you, Elise. I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for Lindsay's team and all of you to put this event on. It's really meaty. I think you should all know we're now at the high energy portion of the morning after Vivek and Douglas Murray, who are a good way to start. At any National Review event, it's you have to fill out your bingo card with de Tocqueville and with Burke and probably Russell Kirk and a few others. But I think we want right here to make sure we fill out the Edmund Burke card, spot on the card, because this notion that he had of little platoons of society, which is very adjacent to and complementary to Tocqueville's idea of free association, is really woven into American culture. And in some important respects, I think the idea of philanthropy in America has uniquely American characteristics. It really functions here in a way that's different than other societies, even with highly developed economies. And it's not simply a matter of people giving large amounts of money. It really is that Burkean idea of individual involvement and creating structures and seeing a problem and addressing it without necessarily asking permission to do so. You know, there are trivial examples in our culture and significant ones. Being a fan of old movies, I often think of the old Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney movies. You know, it's like, oh, let's do a show. And it's really that idea that here's something, let's just do it. And I think this mentality of philanthropy, which is really important, it's very similar to the mentality that animates our private enterprise system and entrepreneurs. And we'll talk a little bit about how those get interwoven in a lot of surprising ways because they are connected. But I think this creation of these mediating structures through philanthropy are really important. They're sources of innovation, of course. But there's another aspect, too, which is, as we all know, in many areas of many problems, challenges, there's what in the military we'd call a school solution, and then there's a field solution. And the difference is, yes, it's important to have these abstract ideas and plans. I'm a bit of a planner myself, but it's really important to get out in the field and say, well, here's something we can do, whether it's a school or whether it's something in your community. And that is the essence of it. So I think in many respects, philanthropy as a strength of America is derivative of our culture of free association and practicality and locality and involvement. And by the way, it shouldn't go without being mentioned up front here, Elise, that the Philanthropy Roundtable is a hugely valuable and important institution in advising and encouraging these impulses. So thank you also for your work.
Thank you. And I completely agree with you that I've seen firsthand how uniquely American philanthropy is. I used to run a family foundation, and we gave internationally, and it was really shocking to see just the lack of support for organizations in other countries, even in very developed European countries. They just don't have the culture of giving that we have in America, and it's very special and unique here. So I think, and I think you're right about the role of being entrepreneurial and how that's part of the American spirit. I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal philanthropy and how you've approached it.
Well, I sometimes think I need to work harder, and I could be better at the philanthropy part. But you know, there's a religious idea embedded in all of this, of course, from different traditions. But certainly in my own, there's this notion that in philanthropy or in giving or being part of your community, you should think of it in three levels, right? You think at a parish level, you give and you get involved in your parish. Your second level was in your community. What's going on in your community where you live? And then thirdly, the world. The world is out there and is a broken world, of course. And what can you do to do something in that regard to make a difference? And you know, whether we fall into it just by the nature of the people we meet and the things we do, or whether we think about it, it's good to think in those terms. And I think in my case, of course, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it, that your first philanthropic focus should be National Review Institute. There should be no ambiguity there, because I think it's kind of in the middle part of those three, in that it's part of our community as a nation and as citizens. And philanthropy, not just big, but small and in between, philanthropy is fundamentally an expression of citizenship. We're citizens, we're not subjects, we don't have to wait around for someone to do something to us or for us, we do it. That's our culture. We should celebrate that culture. But I think, for example, I live in central New Jersey, in Princeton. One of the things that was really important to me, and it was sort of one of these things that no one was paying too much attention to, although there was someone, is the Princeton Battlefield Society. The Princeton Battle was a hugely important event in American history. The state had sort of taken over it and made it into a park, and no one was paying attention. And so we had an organization to really work at reviving interest in the historical instruction that a battlefield offers you on a tangible basis. One thing on an international basis, and I think this is very important too, one of my mentors in all of this was Dusty Rhodes, who was, of course, a longtime president of National Review and an outstanding figure. Yes, let's remember Dusty. I think of Dusty a lot. Here was a man who came from nothing, worked hard, had positive spirit, was persistent, looked for what he could do to make the world a better place in a very conscious way, and, oh, by the way, was really good at it. That's a good example for us. But Dusty, when I first met him, was involved in something called the International Rescue Committee, which is just this outstanding organization around the world. And how did it start? It started by trying to help Jewish refugees get out of Europe in the Second World War, and a man named Leo Chern got involved thereafter and went on Ed Sullivan and said, you need to give money in 1956 to Hungarian refugees coming out of Hungary because the Soviets were invading. And it became an organization that was preeminent in helping people come out of totalitarian oppressive situations and help their lives be better. It was a great organization. A very close friend of mine, and this is how some of these arise, I guess, named Mako Fujimura, who's a great artist. He and his wife started an organization in India, and she's a lawyer and he's an artist, and I don't even know how they got connected, but it's an outstanding organization called Embers, and it's directed to saving these children who are growing up in the red light district of Mumbai, who really have no hope without some sort of help from somebody. And how He-Jin, his wife, got involved, I don't even remember the origin story, but now they've built buildings, they've got the local community involved, they're educating these girls. You know, can that make a difference? Can that change the world? Well, it changes the world for certain people. And, you know, it's, again, this mentality that I think is uniquely American. Both He-Jin and Mako are, you know, first-generation Americans, and they have the culture, and it's just, this is something we can do. Actually, we can do it better than what they're doing, and let's find other people who value it, get them to do it as well, and that's the philanthropic spirit.
I love that, and you know, I think it speaks to just the variety of causes and the diversity of causes that are out there. You know, everyone has their own passions and interests, and they're looking around and connections, and people connect them to other things that they may not know about. And that's what actually makes philanthropy so special.
And part of it, when you go into the international realm, it's part of the American brand. You know, if you spend a lot of time overseas working with businesses or philanthropic organizations or governments or whatever, you know right away, it's, oh my gosh, these Americans are here. It puts a different flavor to the effort. It brings credibility. And you know that these people are serious when they show up because these are like the Americans.
Peter, you're a successful businessman. How do you bring some of your business acumen to your philanthropy, or do you think of them very differently?
Yeah, you know, my business acumen, I sometimes wonder, sometimes, because if you do anything like venture capital for a while, you know that if you invest in 10 companies, 8 of them are disasters. And you sort of think back like, well, why did I think that was a good idea? So, you know, maybe part of being somewhat successful is realizing your limitations, of course, not to go all Clint Eastwood on us, but a man's got to know his limitations. Sometimes we don't, but nonetheless, you know, I think it is, in fact, Elise, it's almost the same thing. And it goes back to, why is this an American strength? And part of it is the idea of philanthropy, the actions of people at any level of civic association, donation, activity are really, it's the same mentality as an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist. You know, I've spent a lot of time in the legal and business worlds, but what's really interesting and exciting, and in the last number of years of my career, it's dealing with these really interesting, smart, energetic, maybe they don't have a lot of common sense, kids who are starting something. You know, they're Mickey Rooney right out of that movie. Like, hey, let's cure cancer. And I'm sitting there saying, well, I'm in favor of that, but well, like how and what? And sometimes it's okay to not know what you don't know, and they don't often, but sometimes they really do, and they think of a different way to do this. And the mentality for some of these entrepreneurs, well, the mentality I think for almost all of them isn't, I'm going to get rich this way. I'm kind of involved because I wouldn't mind getting rich with a really good investment, providing value and solving a huge problem. But a lot of the entrepreneurs, that's sort of in the back of their mind as a possibility. But what's really there is, here's a pain point. I've had some familiarity with it. I can do it better. I know how to do it, you know? And that mentality, I think of it as an entrepreneurial mentality, is very much similar to the philanthropist who says, you know, we can do this better. How do, you know, I've been successful over here, and now we can't get the school to work or something. Really, we got to be able to do it. You know, I wasn't a huge fan of his political world, but because I don't think it made sense. But Ross Perot was an interesting figure, because you know, he ran for president, and his concept, which was very limited and I think inadequate, was, well, just open up the hood and we'll get some experts and we'll fix it. And it's this expertness mentality that really is a category error for self-government in a lot of ways. But that attitude was really good. And of course, he was a philanthropist. But this attitude that we can do it, you know, let's invest some resources or time and let's figure it out. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, there is this notion of gaining a return for it. But often that's not the only motivator. And in fact, for great philanthropists, you see this in education. We've talked about it some at this conference. They're in it because they think there's a better way to do it. And they're the ones that want to bring some innovation to a sclerotic system, whatever it is, education, medicine, and so forth.
Right, and I think that risk-taking is incredibly important, and frankly, we probably need more of it in philanthropy. So I want to switch topics a little bit and talk about values in giving. How do you think about incorporating your values in your giving? I know we've had some conversation about higher ed, for instance, and you know, some of the things you've seen and your peers do in higher education in terms of investments, and maybe some thoughts about that. So how do you think about values in terms of your giving, and what are some mistakes or opportunities that you see on that front for others?
Yeah, one can get into some hot water pretty quickly in this area if one were to criticize, for example, giving money to institutions that have $40 billion and are unaccountable and hate America. And there are a few I could name, so I won't name them, but that's probably should not be someone's focus of philanthropy, even though they had a great experience in those 4 years. And even though some of those institutions do great work, and sometimes it can be, you know, compartmentalized. But I remember back to when I was a very young lawyer. I started practicing law, and Sullivan and Cromwell, many years ago. And there was, in our building in Lower Manhattan, there was a project. Someone decided we needed a memorial celebrating the Vietnam veterans. And this is the early 1980s. And I'm sorry to report that at the time, a number of the partners of Sullivan and Cromwell had not served in the military and didn't really, you know, I'm not sure this was so important. But I decided I come from a military family, this was important to me. And it was a good thing, Lower Manhattan, we're going to have a memorial to Vietnam veterans. And, you know, I worked at it and I spent time at it and I got sort of grudging permission to do it. But in that effort and some other efforts, I remember the partner supervised me and said, well, okay, you understand that if you're doing something pro bono, you do it at the same level with the same intensity, with the same preparation that you would do for one of our firm's clients. There was no casualness about it. And you see that in a lot of areas of business, that people who are successful are paying attention that there's not drift or you lower the standards simply because it's a philanthropic project. And I think a lot of people who are in a position to be philanthropists on a larger scale don't always bring to bear the skill set and the mentality and the accountability and the innovative nature to their giving that they brought to whatever enterprise they might have been involved with. And so that can lead to kind of feel-good giving that in its worst version is just virtue signaling, and its better intended version is give it to the alma mater or whatever, which I'm here to tell you, they don't need it, so don't give it to them. And they don't like you, and don't do it. And because, and you alluded this a minute ago, Elise, in America for sure, there are so many outstanding big and small opportunities to give your extra nickels to help them work. Go find them. Spend some time on it. Be an adult about it. And don't do the sort of obvious giving. And don't forget National Review Institute. Sorry.
You know, it's interesting because, of course, many of the people in our community, the philanthropists in our community, who share our values give to their alma mater and feel very strongly about that. But what we encourage is if you're going to do it, be thoughtful. Think about putting together a grant agreement, targeting it for something very specific, and really paying attention. So I think the accountability piece is important, and there are a lot of minefields there.
Yeah, and but do it. You know, that's the key thing. That's the Burkean, Tocqueville American idea is do it. You know, work hard, create some value. Think about the fact that there's, you know, a larger community and you're a citizen. You know, you're not a subject. It's not going to happen. The problem will not solve itself. And in fact, nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's some small problem, it's an acute or even big problem. If you don't do something, some bright-eyed assistant professor somewhere is going to write a long paper about why the government really should absorb that entire area of society to fix this problem. You know, and that's really unlikely to be a successful solution. And, you know, citizens need to step into that gap.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, which is about local engagement. You know, we've talked about some of the national and international giving that you've been interested in. Why do you think local giving is so important, and how would you encourage people to get engaged on the local level?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up again. It's really important, and I do think, as I mentioned before, these three levels of kind of giving of yourself. But one of the things about being local is you live there, and maybe your family lives there, but also you're interacting face to face. I mean, one of the problems with bureaucracies, and modern complex society does require certain degrees of bureaucracies and accountability, but in the local area, you're dealing with people directly. You're involved with them. And one of our, particularly in the modern age with our digital tools and our screens, is there's a temptation to draw back, in effect, from human interaction, you know, being with people and helping them directly, and not presuming that you're in another category or something, but getting down in the dirt and working with them. And I think local engagement is crucial also, of course. You have an opportunity to have a direct impact in helping people's lives. There's no question that you're there more often, you see it, you're part of it, and you know, communities are where change really happens. It's not an abstraction, it's true. So, I mean, I think local giving, one of the things I mentioned earlier, the Princeton Battlefield Society, it's a local thing, it's also a little bit larger, but everybody loved the place. You drive by it, you see it, and it's in disrepair, and people wonder why. Well, you know, I went there, I was interested, I met a guy that was starting the society. I was inspired. I hate to say I lived in Princeton for 5 or 6 years, and I know a lot about the American Revolution, and I had never studied the Battle of Princeton, which, by the way, you all should, Washington's Crossing, David Hackett Fisher. It is the absolute pivot point of American independence. It was at that field, right where I drive by and I walk there today, that America became a nation and not just sort of this random collection of angry farmers. We have angry farmers all the time, God bless them, and angry other people. And until Princeton, we had some angry farmers. After Princeton, we had a nation. We had an army. We had a reason to be free. Go walk the land. And when, by the way, you see it in disrepair, that was a gift for me to be able to be involved with that. My God, it's a wonderful thing.
Well, we're getting toward the end of our time, Peter, but I wanted to ask you one more thing, which is, what advice would you leave for anyone in the room who's maybe just starting out in their philanthropic endeavors?
Well, you know, in any undertaking, life's too short not to do something that engages you. Now, obviously, we all have to make a living. You know, first and foremost, we got to find a way to develop our skill set and our abilities and be involved in something that's worthwhile and functional, sustainable. So that's important. But even when, you know, you're out of school, you get your first job or something, and I know people in the room, I can see you, who right off the bat, they were interested in something. They wanted to be part of it. And you don't have to be a substantial giver at all. In fact, at that point, you're at some risk, as we referred to earlier. If you had a lot of money to give away somehow, oh my gosh, that's a temptation to be foolish. But when you're starting out, it's like anything else. Develop your knowledge, your skill set, your self-confidence and capabilities, and be discerning about what's important. There's a lot of things we see in politics for sure, but it's true in other areas that have a really attractive, tempting headline title. It's like, oh, are you in favor of education? Well, yeah. Well, okay, then give. Well, like, wait a minute, what is it I'm giving to and what is it about? So make sure you know and you engage with something that is important to you, because at the end of the day, if something is not engaging and important and you don't understand it, it's easy to be ineffective and drift off and, you know, see what's on TCM, what great movies, you know. So you need to be engaged in these things. And so I would encourage people not to be put off as they're starting out because they don't have a lot of money to give. That's not really the point. The point is the great thing, and this goes back full circle now, I think, to a fundamentally religious idea, certainly a Christian idea, that you receive by giving. And at the end of the day, we are receiving a blessing when we give. And that's a simple, true reality.
Thank you. Beautifully said. I think philanthropy has just a tremendous potential to address some of really the most pressing problems that we're facing as a country. Education, you mentioned, root causes of poverty, improving economic opportunity for every American. And, you know, I really think it, you know, has the power to improve the lives of all Americans and people around the world. As you mentioned, international giving is very important too. I hope everyone today will think about how they can identify their passions, their interests, what they might be interested in their community, and consider being philanthropic. I'm sure everyone in this room already is. You're here and part of this wonderful organization.
National Review Institute.
Of course, should be your first stop. And Philanthropy Roundtable should be your second one. But thank you all for being part of this conversation. Thank you, Peter, for joining me. And enjoy the rest of your day.